This video actually marks the first time that I've been approved for an early hands-on preview of a video game. Now granted, it isn't a high-profile AAA game from one of the big three, but what it is niche. I did say that I would try to find and shine a spotlight on some of the lesser-known stuff that I come across. This hands-on preview is not a review, and I can't legally talk about or show you anything beyond the first hour of gameplay. This is just me sharing my early impressions of a game. So with that out of the way, let's talk about time on Frog Island. At this point, I've had access to the full game for just under a week, and I've played well past the 1 hour mark. As I said, I can't discuss or show anything from after the first hour or even really hint at what's to come, so again, please don't expect this to be any kind of review because everything I'm going to talk about is from the first hour of gameplay. So the first question we need to answer is, what is Time on Frog Island? Well, it's a sort of sandbox adventure simulation game. The gameplay revolves around you figuring out what you need and then exploring the game world to figure out where to get it, without much direction from the game itself. You begin the game with a brief cutscene showing the player character on a small boat during a heavy storm. You then wake up on a beach of an unknown island near your wrecked boat. Your goal is to simply rebuild the boat so that you can continue on your adventures. You'll need to find items like a new sail, rope, wooden panels, and more in order to repair the broken boat, but that is easier said than done. As far as I can see, the game has no inventory menu, no quest log, no maps, and none of the characters actually speak. It's up to you to basically figure out how to get what you need, which is where the sandbox element comes into play. The island itself is called Frog Island, and it is well named. Every character you meet is a sort of humanoid frog kind of character, and the only way to communicate is by using the symbols that appear above their heads in little speech bubbles. This is also how you gain an understanding of what specific characters want. The symbols can be angry faces, happy faces, or perhaps a certain item that's found in the wild. Some characters want items that you can only obtain by helping another character to get what they want. So in a way, it's a little bit like an adventure puzzle game, and it's even got some similarities to the classic point-and-click adventure games as well. The game does feature a day-night cycle and also a weather system, which both have an effect on certain things. For example, there might be some items you can only find at night, or there might be a character who only shows up after a certain amount of days have passed. At night, you can pick up 3 pieces of wood and throw them into a designated area to automatically start a campfire. Once you've done that, you can click on that campfire in order to sleep and skip time to the next morning. Each time you do go to sleep, you'll also see these still images that seem to share a bit of the player character's backstory. From what I've seen in-game, these seem to show that he's lost someone important to him, although I don't exactly know how it all ties together. And that about does it for the gameplay side of things. It really is as simple as that. So before I talk about my personal opinions on the game, I think it's also a good idea to remind you all that this is a relatively simplistic indie title and there just isn't going to be a ton to say about it. That said, I do have a few things I'd like to point out and bring to your attention, so let's get into them. Firstly, this game was originally going to be called Trading Time: A Croak Tale, and I think that would have been a much better and more fitting title for the game. It's not that I think it, sounds a lot better, it's just that it describes the game more accurately. When I first saw the game and applied for the preview, I was actually under the impression from the name and the screenshots that this was going to be a sort of farm sim style of game, like Rune Factory or My Time at Portia, something like that. I assumed that you would wash up on the beach and then maybe build yourself a little home and help the villagers grow crops, make money, and essentially gain the trust of these sort of frog people who would then help you repair your boat, and that would be the end of it. However, that's really not the case at all, at least from what I've played in the first hour. There is a little bit of that here and there, I suppose, but it's much more of a puzzle game where you're trying to figure out what you need to repair the boat, and then you trade items with the frogs to obtain those things that you need, and that's kind of it. And I understand that that might sound like I'm bashing the game a little bit, but I'm really not. It's really my fault for having that expectation of a game I knew nothing about. I can't exactly say the game's bad because it isn't what I was hoping for, if you see what I mean. I guess it does kinda look like a farm sim game at first glance, but I still think it's on me. So talking about the game on its own merits and thinking about what the developers are trying to achieve, I think it works pretty well. I definitely think it could do with some way to track a few things, although I know that kind of goes against the point of the game. I mean, to be fair, I suppose you may gain access to some different systems later on, but from what I've played, it doesn't seem like it. I'll give you an example. Some of the characters wander around the game world. I spoke to someone who wanted a saw for cutting down trees, so I found the saw randomly while exploring and I picked it up. I managed to find my way back to where the frog was that wanted the saw, but he wasn't there anymore. Then I had to basically roam around looking for him, and of course I couldn't find him. So I dropped the saw where he was before and came back the next day. Luckily he was there and I picked up the saw and gave it to him. Now, if the game had a simple map that showed my location and the location of frogs that I'd met, I would have been able to track him down much more quickly and it wouldn't have been so frustrating. As I said, I get that the point of the game is to be able to figure out these things without the help, but I also think there's a delicate balance that can sometimes lean more towards frustration and irritation. I wasn't personally too bothered by that interaction specifically, but I do think it could have been streamlined a bit. It's also worth noting that there's probably going to be a day one patch for the game when it releases, and I'm obviously playing this game early without that patch. Along the same lines of thinking, I'd say that not being able to carry key items that you discover is a bit of an odd choice. Even the classic point-and-click adventure games allowed you to carry a few items at a time, but here you can carry one at a time, and that's literally it. There were a few times where I would discover an item that I knew someone else needed while on a long trip to give another character something they needed, so I had to basically just leave it there and hope that I could remember where it was. Again, I do get it, I know that that's just how this game is meant to be, and that's absolutely fine. I'm just, presenting my first impressions and relaying my experiences to you. I guess whether or not this kind of gameplay bothers you is subjective, but for me it seemed a little bit too restrictive. Some of the marketing for the game actually describes the gameplay as a spaghetti network of trades. That does seem to be the case from my experience, and that's also why limiting you to holding one item seems like an odd choice to me. I'm playing this on a Nintendo Switch, and I think it looks pretty good for what it is. It's a somewhat charming art style, I think it's quite colourful and appropriate for the genre, but even so I imagine that the PC or current gen console versions will look and run better. There were some areas of the game where the frame rate completely tanked, but it always seemed to be in that one area, so perhaps that could be fixed before launch. One thing I did appreciate was the fact that some puzzles could be solved in different ways. Sometimes a character may be willing to trade you an item that you need for something that they really want. However, the item that they want from you isn't always easy to get. Luckily though, many of these requested items can be obtained in various different ways, which does cut down on frustration and increases the chances of you discovering the solution. The official release date for the game is the 12th of May 2022, and considering that I have the full game, I assume that I'll be able to post a proper review nearer the time. It looks like it's going to be available on all current and last gen consoles as well as PC for around £20 in the UK and around $20 in the US. Looks like we got the short end of the stick here in the UK price-wise, but unfortunately that's kind of just how things go. So far, time on Frog Island seems to be shaping up quite well for the type of game that it is. It does have a minor performance issue and a few gameplay choices that don't work for me personally, but overall, for a small indie game, my short time with it has been rather enjoyable. Ultimately, I think you're probably going to need to be a fan of puzzle games or maybe point-and-click adventures to fully enjoy this game when it releases. At a glance, it seems like a somewhat involved farming sim or maybe an island life sim, but I can tell you it's absolutely not. It's unfortunate, but I do actually think that a few people may be disappointed with the game after assuming that it's going to be something that it isn't. My only real feedback to the developers at this point would be to keep doing what you're doing, but perhaps update your marketing just a little bit to ensure that people know exactly what they're getting. If you enjoyed the video, I really hope you'll consider subscribing, and if you like what I do and want to help support the channel, please check out the first link in the video description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.